As you may remember, Lyndon Johnson launched in the early 60s the War on Poverty from eastern Kentucky. Lyndon, being a clever fellow he was, wanted to launch that war with the faces of white people because he knew that the stereotype would go the other way, and he wanted to show the white face of poverty and not have it co-opted with just its people of color's problem. One of the War on Poverty's programs is to set up film equipment in storefronts. And they do this in 11 communities around the U.S. Appalshop, Whitesburg, Kentucky being the only rural community. The other 10 are inner city communities. And the idea is that kids will take this equipment. These are high school kids, not even the youngest of you here age. The idea is that they'll come down and take the equipment and that they'll thereby get a head start, kind of a job training, and that they'll then be able to make films and be able to be on television, work at television studios. Well, there was no film industry and there were no television stations where we were. In fact, the closest public transportation was 4 hours away. Now, this was a huge asset. And so the kids just took the equipment and started making film. So as soon as the government pulled out their money, which was a year and a half later, this Appalshop was the only place that had done anything. Everybody else was still lost in the syllabus. So here's this tremendous pride now among young people who for the first time are able to tell the Appalachian story in the voices of their own people from the inside out. And it was catalytic in the entire, people came from Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, all the surrounding states to seize this opportunity. These people in their 20s, young men and women, to seize this opportunity to tell this story. And so it began with films and video. We've now made some 200. And then we started our own record company so people wouldn't have to go through Nashville and the whole recording bill. We started the theater. This is a picture just in last week from an off-Broadway production we have right now in New York, which is a collaboration with Crayonas Theater, a Puerto Rican theater. We've been collaborating 21 years. So those are three. The next slide will show you our radio station. We have a 24/7 radio station. You can get it, of course, streaming online. And this is our Appalachian Media Institute, which is passing on this same training to new generations. The key thing about that, yes, you learn a lot of skills, but you also learn to lead. And you learn what it means to be a young leader in a community. And then, of course, we have an archive. The founders, that's us, those founders. And what we have now is a new generation taking over. I'm part of the old generation. I'm just stepping aside after 2.5 years of interim director of the entire organization. And these new people are taking it up. And they are at a very different moment because King Cole, which ruled for 125 years, has now abdicated. And that has left the region without any economic plan. It was single industry by design because you keep a large workforce. And when you have a lot of coal productions up, you got the people. When it's down, they're laid off. That kind of boom and bust that many of you probably are familiar with. So here's a new generation taking over, and they're really tuned to this idea of sins of development as freedom. So that is this moment of opportunity when we're linking the regeneration of Appalshop's economy with the regeneration of the region's economy.
Well, it turns out that the folks there, because of Appalshop work, they have these incredible human assets, which those organizations, MIT and Harvard, were using for a National Science Foundation project on how to stop bullying in schools. They actually were using those cultural assets to build a product to stop bullying. So when we then took those products and said they own it and we assetized it, we then worked with them, their core assets, authentic voice, Appalachian humanness, cultural sustainability, as core assets for the redevelopment of the area and turning the area into a culture hub, of which based around all those things. Right? You have those things all sitting there in front of you, but the whole idea behind this is to show how we can then discover ways in which culture and art and plays and all those things can be used. And when we have that discussion, I can talk a little bit more about how these things can be clustered into making the whole be greater than the sum of the parts, and how when you partner now with new technology, something like Appalachian Humanness and First Voice, you actually can now create what you will see in this document here, in their strategic plan, a new company called Mountain Tech Media, based now on working with businesses all across the region. So you can get the arts and culture not only creating intrinsic value in terms of democratic strength and sense of agency and empowerment, it can also create instrumental value in terms of value in exchange in the marketplace, that they can be paid for their value creation and use that to build their economic development. So Appalshop now is going to be able to do this to finance its larger development goals for this region.
To sum up, there's one sort of simple principle we're working with, and that is that we define culture in the anthropological sense. That culture is the intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and material traditions and features of a people. So if you think, what are you but your intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and material traditions and features? That's who we are. So culture really is about identity. And art is a special case of culture, a constructed case. So with this definition follows our claim and our proposition that culture shapes individual and collective identity, bounds or expands the imagination, and influences micro and macro economic initiatives. And that's where my buddy and I meet.